My data is late. My data doesn't look right by some definition of doesn't look right. And I'm getting weird errors and I don't know why. There are Gartner terms that are equivalent to those things like data quality, observability, data downtime. But broadly, it's kind of those three things.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 333, the hidden problems behind every data pipeline. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darin and Viktor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darin reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Viktor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darin Pope and Viktor Farsic.
Viktor, with the advent of AI, how often have you been actually writing front-end things by hand?
Front-end or Node.js?
Yes.
I'm spending now all my time in TypeScript in Node.js, mainly because that's equivalent of what Python is for machine learning. That's what Node.js these days is for MCPs.
But you're still trying to stay far away from front-end stuff, right?
No, I don't care. I mean, AI is writing. I'm just kind of like, I'm a reviewer now.
On today's show, we have Pete Hunt on. He's the CEO at Dagster. Pete, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How's it going?
Good. Now, Dagster, we'll talk about Dagster, weave it in throughout. But Pete was on the original team that brought React.js to life. Boo. So we can blame you, is what I'm hearing.
Is that a Vue.js boo, or is that a something else boo?
That's just JavaScript in general boo.
Okay. We can chat programming languages if you want.
Oh, we'll go down all the rabbit holes that sound interesting.
We'll end up in Rust somehow.
Yeah, probably. So you were at Facebook, I guess, at the time before it became Meta, when all this came to life, right?
I still call it Facebook, yeah.
Okay, you still call it Facebook. Okay, good. Okay, so whose genius idea at Facebook was it to come up with a framework that has been unleashed on the world?
My good friend, Jordan Walk. You can blame him. But, it was one of those projects that kind of came out of necessity. He was working on the ads create flow at Facebook, which is this kind of like very complex at the time UI, and still probably is very complex. I haven't bought ads on Facebook in a while, but it's very complex UI and a lot of money flowed through it, like all the self-serve dollars. And they had this big tangled mess of JavaScript spaghetti. And there were probably 3 different teams trying to solve that problem. And, a bunch of really talented people working on it. And React was the technology that people ended up liking. I ended up liking. I was one of the first big users of the framework. And then before I knew what was happening, I was kind of contributing code back to it and becoming a member of the team. And so it was one of these things that kind of very organically came together, but it was a lot of fun to work on.
Okay, I don't hear the word fun and JavaScript usually in the same sentence.
Well, I would argue that JavaScript is not so fun, but modern TypeScript is pretty fun.
I can actually confirm that.
Whoa, there we go.
No, I mean, TypeScript, it might or might not be my favorite language, but it definitely feels much better than working, straight in with Node.js, right, with JavaScript. It's almost as if it's a wrapper that converts, and I'm going to be mean as well here, that converts Node.js madness into something actually that looks like a real language.
I agree. Over the years, the core JavaScript language has gotten a lot better. And I think that when you actually stack up TypeScript running on Node.js versus Python with Pywrite or whatever type checker you want to use, I think TypeScript in Node.js actually is pretty favorable to modern
I
Python.
choose TypeScript, Node.js over Python any time of the day. The old version of Node.js, the one that isn't improved, if you ask me.
Well, the reason why TypeScript is good is one reason, and it's in the name. Type. I dislike loosely typed or non-typed languages, but again, I come from a Java background, so there's a whole different bias there. So we're talking languages. So you were at Facebook, you worked on React, you left Facebook. Did you leave Facebook before it came Meta?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I left a long time ago.
And you went off and did something that then got you acquired by
Twitter. The reason why I got involved with React in the first place, I was a generalist at Facebook. I was working on everything from the MySQL infrastructure for photo tagging to your endpoints that support the mobile app to front-end code that runs in the desktop web browser. So there's kind of a wide variety of stuff there. We acquired Instagram. I was one of the first people to go over to the Instagram team to kind of like bridge their engineers with our engineers. And that was a lot of fun. One of the first problems that we had to solve there was around trust and safety. And so specifically think about like fake accounts. Back then, Instagram was already very popular. It had gotten acquired for $1 billion. They had a lot of users. It was a giant list of regular expressions that was like, if your email address ends in a Z and it's at hotmail.com.au, then reject the sign up, stuff like that. Because clearly in the middle of the night one night, there was some spam attack, and that was the magic regular expression that stopped the spam attack that day. And, the first thing we did was kind of plug them into Facebook's really cutting edge site integrity infrastructure, which is large scale, like streaming semi-real time infrastructure that tries to find spam, basically. I don't know how it works now, but like at the time, it was a lot of like real-time counters and heuristics based on counters and regular expressions and stuff like that. And we were like, man, like you shouldn't have to sell your company to Facebook to get access to this technology. And so we ended up starting a company to try to bring that type of technology to everybody else who, wasn't Facebook, right? That's like the world's most common startup playbook back then. It's like Facebook or Google or Microsoft build some internal tool or infrastructure. Let's go bring that to everybody else. And we had a good, 3.5-year run doing that. We served a lot of customers. One of them was Musical.ly, which later became a little app called TikTok. So we were kind of one of the first trust and safety tools there. Anyway, we wound that down, but that's really, I think, where I cut my teeth on data and infrastructure specifically. Like I had done a little bit of infrastructure work at Facebook, but it was even back then, it was such a big machine at that point. And there was lots of abstractions over the hardware and over the databases that, it was pretty sugar-coated. But man, when you are thrown into a startup environment, all you have is go right to the metal, virtualized cloud environment, like really hardcore. And I'm just like, we're very spoiled today with our modern cloud infrastructure, whatever. But there's still no netting between you and downtime. And so I learned a lot about how to architect large scale systems, how to know when to take on technical debt, when not to take on technical debt. And most importantly, like we did a lot of real-time stream processing. So I learned a lot about how to do that and developed kind of an appreciation for sketching algorithms, which are these like approximate counting and approximate statistical data structures, which was pretty fun at the time.
I'm still stuck with the image of you trying to understand very, very long regular expressions and rewrite them into something else. I would quit my job, man, before I would have to do that.
It's so funny you say that because number one, I think every company or every piece of infrastructure, like a rite of passage is to have downtime due to a regular expression. Like somebody writes a regular expression somewhere and it has n squared performance or n squared complexity, and it just takes down your service, right? That happened to us, and we learned our lesson and used RE2 instead of the built-in regular expression engine we were using, and that made things a lot better. But actually, one of our most used products was like a regular expression editor to help people like not have to write these convoluted expressions and instead use a simplified syntax to do it. So kind of a funny story.
I'm more interested into, I assume that tool would do it, kind of like somebody. I don't have such a big problem writing regular expression. I have huge problem understanding somebody's regular expression. Kind of like it's similar to experience I had with Perl, right? Kind of, yeah, I could write Perl back in the day. Give me somebody else's Perl code and I have no bloody idea what's happening.
That's right. You have to be like in the exact same room you were in, listening to the same music you were listening to, getting into your same mind space before you can finally divine what the regex actually does, right? Yeah, that's why we actually, we had test cases for our regexes. And that was really important because every time we would go in and make tweaks to them, like if you miss one character, it could like match the whole string or match the set of all strings. And if you overmatch in a anti-spam environment, you'll just like block everybody's posts, right? So that's not good.
I want to step out of the story for just a minute. I want to go back to the acquisition of Instagram by Facebook. While you all were talking, I went and looked it up. That was April of 2012. Here we are almost in April. It's actually January of 2026. Almost.
So,
No, 2026.
I know.
Last year was
Yeah,
2025.
yeah. You see?
Math. And not only math, date math. If anybody ever tells you date math is easy, they're lying to you. But anyway, we're almost 14 years after that acquisition for roughly $1 billion. It was never truly disclosed, but the rumor mill was about $1 billion. Back at the end of last year, in September-ish, Atlassian acquired DX for the magic number of $1 billion. Now, it seems like this is your CEO hat on right now, Pete, so just keep this in mind. It seems like after 14 years, just the rate of inflation would have taken that $1 billion up to something else. What do you think?
You know, unicorns aren't what they used to be, right? At least that's what all the VCs say on Twitter. You know, I follow all those guys and yeah, I just saw somebody the other day talking about how you're not supposed to triple, double anymore. You're supposed to, I don't know, 5x in your first year or something, or 10x.
Oh, yeah. Triple, double, that's dead. That's gone.
Yeah. What are you even doing? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
how do you, how you dare to triple the ARR this year?
I know. It's ridiculous. So, I don't know. I've been around for a while. I mean, we're talking about stories from 2012 at this point, and I do feel like every year they always talk about the Series A crunch or how hard it is to raise money or how high the expectations are. And, you know, I think there's some truth to that every year, but the fact is that a lot of deals get done, a lot of growth multiples, a lot of valuations, and you got to take everything you read on Twitter with a grain of salt.
Wait, I thought that was gospel on Twitter. Or X, whatever the case is.
Oh yeah,
so I notice you're still using Facebook and Twitter, so you're not letting go of the names. Let's jump back into the story. So you did this little startup. You spun yourself out effectively from Facebook, and then you get acquired by Twitter.
That's right.
And for the reason of this whole trust and safety type thing, correct?
Yeah, the timing was very, interesting. We started the company, in 2014 and we sold in 2018. And that was right around the time that Twitter started to kind of like really prioritize trust and safety and started to kind of take a different approach to it. We worked hard and built a really good product, but like with all these things, there's a combination of working hard and luck. And so our timing was frankly very lucky too, which in hindsight is very clear. But yeah, Twitter was prioritizing trust and safety. They were our second largest customer, and we ended up, selling to them.
So what was it like working on the infrastructure of Twitter? I'm assuming you got to go and hug the servers that were serving Justin Bieber's tweets, right?
I don't know if I saw the specific server for Justin Bieber, but they did let us go on a data center tour. And one of the things you do on the data center tour is you put the hard drives into the shredder. And that was super fun. I don't know. Have you ever shredded a hard drive?
I haven't, but I know what it's like.
It is extremely satisfying.
You can't compare it to paper shredding. Let's put it that way.
That's right. I mean, these industrial shredders are pretty serious pieces of machinery, but the data center tour was definitely one of the highlights.
So how long were you at Twitter? So you got acquired in 2017. ish, right? Or 18.
Is 18. So I was there from
Okay.
18 to 22.
Okay. So during the upheaval of everything, what was it like being there during COVID? I shouldn't have said that out loud, but let's ignore the whole acquisition and everything else. Like, just magic hand wave that away for a moment. I know it's part of the story. What was it like? Because it seems like it was just a mess, to put it mildly.
So, I mean, there was a number of things going on. First of all, when I got into trust and safety, it was not like a political thing or politicized thing. I think since then, it's been people's policies with regard to trust and safety, who's allowed on a platform, who's not allowed on a platform, what constitutes hate speech, what constitutes violation of terms of service. It's like very hot button issue right now. When I got into it, it was really about stopping child predators and obvious kind of Viagra scams and stuff like that. So, over that period that I was there, it got progressively kind of more and more politicized, which is kind of one of the reasons why it's just not like a particularly fun category to be in anymore, at least for me. So I ended up moving to data. But when we were there were a number of challenges that we had faced, right? So first of all, there was an election that, during that period, every election, there was kind of a election project to try to kind of defend against any sort of violations of the policies there. We also had COVID-19, and there was a bunch of kind of health policies that rolled out and enforcement of those policies and doing that at scale. One of the big challenges that is not talked about a lot, though, is that there's at least at the time, there's a large manual review team based in a couple of different countries, but Manila was one of the big cities. And Manila locked down really hard when COVID started. We basically relied on manual reviewers in office to do the work. We had to do this fire drill where we're like, okay, we just lost all of our manual review bandwidth. What are we going to do? And so there was this really fast moving project there to figure out, a combination of how do we do more with automation and less with human review? And how do we get the human reviewers back online? And so there was kind of this shipping laptops project. Oh, the web apps don't load and the residential internet because it's too slow. So we have to optimize those. There's also a big security concern, right? When you go from a secure office facility to a working from home environment. And so we did a bunch of work on security and access control. So there was just a ton of craziness over there back when I was there. I learned a lot for sure. Like I said, don't really want to work in trust and safety anymore, but I did learn a lot during that period.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how you would write a regex for a hot button topic. I don't know how that would match.
Yeah, I could tell you how that kind of thing does work if that's interesting. It's technically, I think, very interesting, actually.
Sure. Now, you're not under any NDAs that would get you in trouble at this point, right? You can keep it high level.
I mean, these techniques are not they're kind of well known. So I'm not kind of describing any secret sauce or proprietary technology, but there's a number of different ways back then, at least, that you would detect spam. With the rise of LLMs, a lot of this, I think, is changing. Though a lot of the existing techniques are in use because of the scale, and LLMs are a lot more expensive than some of the heuristic-based techniques. So there's a machine learning side of the house that would train on labeled data and try to predict, whether a post or tweet or whatever would eventually get flagged and taken down for violating a policy. Now, you would think that you just engineer the right features, throw it into a statistical model, and have it learn the right coefficients. But the problem is that there's an adversary, and there's latency between when the post happens and when you get the labels and when you retrain, right? So if the adversary is actively trying to avoid what you're doing, the labels are going to be out of date by the time you get them. So the thing with these kind of machine learning based techniques is they are very scalable and they do solve a large part of the problem. But my side of the house was mostly focused on emerging threats. Hey, we've got something that started 5 minutes ago and we have to do something about it now before it takes over the whole site. And so in those situations, we do a number of interesting things. I'll give you one example. We would break posts up into bigrams and trigrams. Well, actually it would be trigrams and skipgrams. So the idea here is you can think of them as you run a bunch of text normalization. You have kind of groups of 3 words or 3 tokens. And then you look for massive shifts in those over time. So there's kind of a certain baseline of how often a trigram is going to be used on the site. And if you see a really big increase in the use of a particular trigram, that might be Justin Bieber dropping a new single back then, or it could be a spam attack. But the thing is, you can kind of surface your top trigrams, maybe filtered by certain criteria, to a small number of human reviewers, and they can very quickly flag, oh, this looks suspicious, this looks suspicious. And then you can really quickly put together a regex rule or some other sort of heuristic that like kind of stems the bleeding a little bit. Now, an adversary can adjust over time, but like what ends up happening is that this heuristic starts to feed into those models and starts to produce labels for those models. So the heuristics and the models kind of work together. It's a very interesting problem when you have this adversary trying to actively avoid your system. So you end up with these techniques that seem kind of hacky, but end up actually working really well at scale.
So again, what I'm hearing is if we had no users, our life would be easy.
Just wait long enough, we're all going to be AI pretty soon, right? So will any of this matter?
What's a good question? So you left Twitter in 22 and you went over to Dagster, right? There was not much of a break there. But you just didn't, parachute in as the CEO. What did you do?
Well, I had been at Twitter for a while, and like we talked about, it was a lot of work. And I met some great people there and I learned a ton, but the work was definitely intense. And my good friend Nick Schrock kind of had called me up while I was there, and he was like, hey man, I'm trying to recruit a head of engineering. Can you help me out? And so I referred him a couple of people, and I was kind of helping him figure out the strategy and stuff like that. And I eventually kind of realized, I might be ready for a change myself now. And it had been, it was the end of 2021, early 2022. Pandemic had been going on for a while in San Francisco. I had just had a kid. And if you're going to change one thing, why not change everything at the same time, right? So ended up, having a kid, moving, and changing jobs all at the same time. And that was kind of how I ended up at Dagster.
You ended up in engineering because I assume that's still your first love, or do you enjoy spreadsheets more today?
I'd say I like engineering. I like selling.
You like selling?
I like selling, yeah.
Tell me more.
Well, in its purest form, and you might have I think that it is like fair to be cynical of sales and sales process and marketing, right? But in its ideal form, you're working at a company with a good product for somebody, and it solves a problem for somebody, and the price that they pay for the product is less than the value they get from it. I think that's true for like most tech infrastructure products, except for maybe Datadog, which, bankrupts everybody. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No, yeah, I don't think you were kidding.
Only sorta. But in many ways, sales is about clarity of communication, right? And it's really about understanding what that person needs, understanding what you got, forming a point of view as to whether your thing helps them or not, and then figuring out how to communicate that in a way that person understands. I learn a lot about the world doing that type of stuff. You learn a lot about your product. You learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about how you communicate. And you also learn a lot about like what other people do, which I think is really fun. So for example, like when we go and we do kind of like sales conversations with Dagster users, right? We have people that like launch rockets with Dagster. We have people that ship porta potties with Dagster. And we have life sciences companies and financial services, all these different industries that are all building data pipelines, right? You get to go in there and learn a little bit about like where your mortgage comes from, or like how prescriptions are tracked and stuff like that. And I just think you get a little taste of like all these different industries, because you ask these data people, like, what's your problem? They tell you your problems. And in many ways, everybody's got similar infrastructure and data problems, but they're working on such different things. It's kind of cool. It's a cool way to experience the world, I think, just going in and talking to lots of people about what they do.
I'm going to send this clip to my salespeople, because you just said understanding what they need and understanding what we've got. My experience is understanding what they need and then making the organization make it happen. That's my experience with sales. They just ask for this. Build it.
Yeah, there's also, it's not quite as simple as that, right? Like as a CEO, you get to do the fun parts of selling, and then there's the, navigating the Byzantine procurement process of an enterprise and negotiating the data retention terms with the security team and going back and forth on payment terms, stuff like that. Like that is a little less fun, a little less creative. But, I think there are parts of selling that are really fun and creative and interesting and exciting.
One thing you said there was, even though you have lots of different industries, there's a lot of similar problems and a lot of similar solutions to those problems, even though it's completely different data sets. What are some of those problems that you're seeing?
My data is late. My data doesn't look right by some definition of doesn't look right. And I'm getting weird errors and I don't know why. There are Gartner terms that are equivalent to those things like data quality, observability, data downtime, right? But broadly, it's kind of those three things. Everybody's got an SLA for like when it has to arrive and what its characteristics need to be. And what happens when there's a failure upstream and how do you handle that? Do you move forward with partial data? Do you not move forward and page somebody? Do you have some sort of automated recovery process for that pipeline? There's a lot of interesting problems in there, but like fundamentally, again, like whether you're testing rocket engines or you're delivering porta potties, it's like, it's the same thing, right? Or it's the same classes of problems, but very different data sets and sometimes different infrastructure.
What if you're delivering a porta potty to a rocket engine? You'd be in trouble, right?
I think it depends on if you put it in the front of the rocket engine or the back, right?
I'm not sure how much companies already came to that realization, but now that everybody's scrambling with AI and failing big time in enterprises, not on individual levels, just to be clear, I feel that more often than not, those failures are tightly related to data, kind of like you just cannot extract the information that system needs.
There's a lot to unpack in that line of questioning, It's like, why do all these data projects fail? I mean, a really common thing that we hear from our stakeholders is, and customers and users, and even internally for a while, is like the data team gets this urgent request from some stakeholder team. Oh my God, we have to know thing X about the business, or thing Y is down, it's very urgent. And the data team scrambles and they build a dashboard and then like nobody uses it, or they look at it once, they say, okay, looks right, thank you. And it's like a very, very common thing that data teams have to deal with. We built this product called Dagster Compass that we've been working on to kind of tackle that specific problem. But I think a lot of the problems in this space are actually pretty similar to what you see in consumer apps. Like we were talking about, I used to work on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, these like consumer apps, and getting people to engage on these things. There's like armies of PhDs and like kind of software engineers and financial analysts deployed to try to get people to become daily active users of these social products. Now, is that healthy for teenagers? Probably not. And that's I think a totally separate conversation. But the fact is like, it's a well-recognized problem that getting people to engage with your product is challenging, right? And building that habit is challenging. And I think that data teams have problems bringing their data sets to market, right? And their dashboards to market. And like, there's a business leader out there. How do you get that person to stop paging the data team and asking them questions and start getting them to self-serve on their own data? And I think that is an area where a lot of these AI companies have not focused yet. I think there's a lot of focus on multi-agent orchestration, for example, where you have all sorts of cool agents calling other agents, and you have evals, and you have multiple different tools, and you're starting to put together this really, really technically interesting thing. But at the end of the day, if nobody uses it, what value does it really produce? So you actually have to, I think, focus on like bread and butter, like usability and awareness and like almost like internal marketing for the data and data products that you're producing. I don't know. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, I mean, that's very similar to other areas where I'm much more involved. Like I'm heavily, for example, in developer platforms, which feels like the same problem. It's kind of, we are building this web UI that will help developers do something, and then nobody's ever touching it because it was a one-off thing or we don't really know what they need. We just assume that they need this, and kind of, at least in that area, I feel that majority of companies are just going in circles and kind of wondering why is this not working?
Yeah, we need to get some of that AI. Can someone go buy some of that AI for us? That's the approach some of these companies take.
Yeah, but AI, I feel that the problem with AI is the problem that we continuously have with every wave. And that's that most companies are aware that their systems are not as they should be. And then they choose to put a new layer that will somehow automatically fix everything. And that's, if you just, this application, this is not working how it should be, right? And so on and so forth. Why don't we put it in a container image, right? That will solve the problem, whatever it was. No, it doesn't work either. Let's put it in Kubernetes. No, let's put it in cloud. Now let's put AI in front of it. And nobody's addressing really issues, right? Everybody is just building layers on top of things that don't work. This is my very pessimistic view of everything. Just to be
You know what that reminds me of is the microservices industrial complex of like kind of maybe 2010 to 2015, and it was like, I'm like a microservices hater, and I don't know what your guys' position is on this stuff. But back when I was kind of running infrastructure teams at Twitter, like microservices were very in vogue. What I realized was happening was, in order to get promoted at a big tech company like a Netflix, a Google, whatever, for Twitter, you have to architect a large-scale distributed system. It's literally written in the promo guidelines. Like, you have to demonstrate system architecture competence. So what do? You build a bunch of services. Like, do they solve the problem for the business? Yes, but do they solve it in the simplest and most maintainable way? Probably not. And then you learn a lot from that process. Venture capitalist shows up, says, hey, you built this complex distributed system. Do you want to go like make that as a company? Sure, let's do that. Like, distributed tracing is a great example, right? Like, so now you have these vendors that like need to induce demand for their like distributed tracing or observability product. And so they get everybody to adopt microservices so that then they need like distributed tracing. And then, the cycle kind of like continues, right? And so it was like, for a while, I think it's calmed down a little bit since the peak in like 2016 or something, but company tech blogs were just content marketing at the end of the day and not good technical advice.
I think it's actually worse than what you described, right? We can now, I'm parking discussion for some later date, microservice versus monolith. But in those scenarios that you're describing, my variation of that scenario is that we transition from monolith to microservices, but actually those don't end up being microservices, but end up being some kind of distributed monolith.
Yes.
But actually you still need to deploy everything at once, and so on and so forth, and you don't get benefit of what you had before. You don't get benefit of what you were supposed to be doing. So you get no benefit from either where you were or where you were supposed to be, and then you start crying. Right?
Yeah.
Because it's most companies that claim that they're doing microservices, they're not doing microservices. Independently now whether that's a good idea or not, they're not doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the platonic ideal of microservices is good, right? Like, in a world where you're unlikely to have cross-cutting changes between multiple services, great. Like, deploy service. I just think it tends to look more like macro services. Like, you get the billing service that does all the billing stuff in like a billing monolith. And then you'll have like the web tier that does whatever the web tier does, right? Like,
or, people who never learned about, for example, backwards compatibility of APIs, and then you change something somewhere, and then you say, now the whole system needs to be rewritten because I did this thing over there. And come on.
Yeah, it's like, I want to change a primary key or like add a new type of primary key. We actually had this at Twitter where it was like, I forgot what it was exactly, but we wanted to be able to. Oh yeah, it was when we launched like a voice notes product or something. And now suddenly, instead of reviewing tweets, you had to review voice notes, which had a different key, like primary key space. And so then we had to push out like this massive, like like all these like dozens of services that expected tweet IDs now had to take these like enums that was like branching on like, is this a tweet or is this a voice note? And it was like, man, if this was just like one monolith, we could just deploy this all today and be done. But now we have to do this like multi-phase deployment and negotiate with all the different teams for when we're going to do this. And it's like a whole thing. kind of silly.
I'm going back to what you were saying earlier about how we're getting all these multi-agent things, and the inverted curve meme kicked into my head of we've got multi-agents right at the very top, and on either end, all you need is Excel. That's what it feels like.
I have a theory that most of actually ideas that we get, like multi-agent now and many, many others before, they're actually good ideas. And they make perfect sense. The real problem is the companies being incapable to understand what it's all really all about and doing the right thing and so on and so forth. Multi-agent makes a lot of sense. It's just that almost nobody needs it.
That's right. That's right. And when they do it, it's usually like encapsulated and looks a lot more like normal software engineering as opposed to some brand new thing, right?
Yeah.
I think it's very similar to microservices, right? Like, I think that the big problem that people had, like what people got wrong with microservices was the day you introduce a new service should be a very sad day. But for most engineers at large tech companies, it's a very happy day. And I think similarly, like if you're going to move to like multi-agent orchestration, it should be like, man, like we're only doing this because we have to do this. There's no other way to solve the problem, and we're willing to take on the complexity cost of this thing.
You know, you reach the point where you say, this does not work anymore. We need more.
Someone needs to figure out how to compensate engineers and provide career paths for them that they don't feel this urge to like, or this need to build complex systems. Because the unfortunate reality is in a lot of companies, you hit a certain ceiling in your career until you do that. And it's like really, I think, a bummer that that's happening.
That's definitely true. But there is also a different aspect, and I'm guilty of it, is some of us, not to say everybody, right, are in this industry because we simply like doing that, like playing with stuff, with toys. You know,
Yeah.
I'm guilty of it. I like playing with new toys. Kind of like,
Yeah,
that's what I like doing.
I think as long as you're explicit about it, right? And like you want to give space for engineers to do creative work and to take risks and to do innovative stuff, right? And I just think that there's like React wouldn't have happened if like Facebook was just like, hey, use jQuery. This React thing is overkill for this app, right? You know, want to, there is definitely gray areas to this, and there's definitely like kind of an art to figuring out, hey, we want to be experimental and risk on and do some fun and exciting research in this area. But for this area, we just got to hit the ship date and we got to do the dumbest thing possible because we're resource constrained or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's definitely nuance.
I feel that very often the real problem there is that, you know, if engineers would have time to play, I'm going to use multi-agent as example, but applies to anything, right? Kind of, hey, I want to see what is this. Does this make sense? I want to play with it for a week or two or whatever the period of time is. And we'll figure it out, and then we'll figure out whether this should be used or no, and so on and so forth, right? But I feel that that's not how the things work. I feel that more often than not, it is mandate from above. Starting today, we are doing multi-agent.
Right.
Kind of like, and then that command trickles down until it reaches the level where nobody even knows anymore why that was decided, and then we all do it.
Yeah. I got in trouble for that one, by the way, for something like that.
Which direction were you?
I was the pointy-haired boss going down, actually. Earlier this year, I sent out this memo. It was like in April. And it was kind of like the point of it was, guys, Claude Code and Sonnet 3.7 came out in February, and it's really good. You guys should check it out if you haven't checked out these AI coding tools. And it's like, I don't care if you use them. I just think you should try them because like you want to have all the information. And we're not going to mandate like what tools people use, but like, and it was interpreted as like, oh my God, are we going to like somebody asked me if that was going to be on the performance review, like the amount of AI use. I was like, no, why would it possibly do that? But actually companies have done that. So it was reasonable feedback in hindsight, but I can see, I've heard like horror stories of CEOs like being very like, you know, dictatorial and like, hey, we gotta take advantage and do technology X. I think there's a difference between like, we must use it and we should explore it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Let me ask the most important question associated with that whole line of thinking. Pete, do you play golf?
I don't.
Well, that's a good thing because your people will probably be safe then because you're not going to be making deals out on the course.
Oh, yeah, no.
which is when usually those kinds of things happen.
Come on, Darin. There are other activities that work for sales. It can be maybe our guest is into sailing.
My wife's into sailing, but I'm
There you go.
not into sailing.
So I'm glad you called yourself out, Pete, because I was going to ask that question. It's like, okay, what pointy-haired boss thing have you done? Did that really go sideways? Like having somebody come back, it's like, we're going to be measured on it. That had to have almost shook you to the core, I would think.
People were pissed, yeah. And I ended up having to kind of like clarify a lot of it. It was one of those things where I think that people don't, like, nobody really wants to be told what to do or like how to do it. And my point was to basically say, hey guys, like, we're going to pay for your AI tools. Please take advantage of this and try it. But send it out as like an email on like a Sunday night. And I think there was some, like, to me, that doesn't matter when the email sent. But like, I heard some feedback from the team, like, you can't send a memo like that. It seems like, makes it seem super serious. Like you're going to fire people that don't like use AI tools. I was like, why would I do that? You know, it's like, I don't know. I think you just measure, like, people can get to their output however they want to do it. Like, we don't dictate VS Code versus Cursor versus Emacs or anything like that. My kind, the Emacs kind, are, I know, a rare species at this point. But
I never understood that need in companies, and I was in a few of those that kind of like, here we all use Eclipse or whatever it is. Kind of.
yeah.
So two things, though, I want to call. So anytime I see an email from a CEO on a Sunday night, that automatically rings bad. Unless you always send something on a Sunday night. Do you?
I don't.
Right.
And
So that's red flag to me.
Right. And it's a red flag to a lot of other people. And I did not know that.
Yeah.
So lesson learned on that one.
Okay. Secondly, we had a episode recently that at the time of recording actually hasn't even come out. But we were talking about, actually Victor sort of brought this point home of, look, we don't care if you use AI, but the bar has moved. That, you know, people are X amount more efficient. Now, some people may or may not be. And, you know, yes, you've said that, no, we're not going to be doing performance reviews. And I'm not trying to put words in, please, anybody from Dexter that listens to this, please don't read anything into this. I am backing Pete into a corner, hopefully politely. But it's like, high level, let's take Dagster out of the middle of it. You're just a general person. If people are using some sort of tooling within a company, and there are other people that are not using that tooling, the people that use the tooling are 2x more, whatever percentage better than the people that don't use the tooling. Does that matter to you as a CEO? Or as leadership within a company? Again, we're not talking Dagster, we're just high level.
Well, man, this is a good question. It doesn't matter what. So there's certain like people have certain levels, right? Like there's a difference between like what's expected of a new grad and what's expected of a senior suite and what's expected of like a staff plus, right? And so, and it's not just like a straight line productivity measurement. You know, there's a lot of stuff like the new grad is going to crank a lot of code, but like a lot of it might spend some time in review because they have to learn the ropes a little bit. And the senior suite is writing some of those complex parts of the code base. And the staff suite is more like leading others as like kind of a player coach. So first of all, like productivity is not like everything.
I mean, how do you even measure productivity of a developer? Now, if you say lines of code or anything in that direction, I'm out.
No. I think the one, in my opinion, the one kind of universal way to measure kind of like an employee's performance is forecasting ability and like, you know, expectation kind of management. So if you are, you know, mid-career or late career, and you're working in an area that is fairly well understood, you should be able to say, hey, this thing's going to be done on this date. And like, you know, most of the time we should be able to forecast that. Or, you know, you should be able to say, listen, we don't know when this thing is going to be ready. In 2 weeks, we're going to be able to give you like a sense for like, here's the range in which something is going to be completed. And that's great. You know, like, I think that it's I've been an engineer for a long time. I know that like there's a ton of unknowns sometimes when you're driving into a legacy system. And I tend to not like at least my management approach is not to go in and say, listen, we need this thing done by this date. It's to kind of start a discussion with the team, be like, listen, when do you think would be practical for us to ship this capability? And then you usually get a range, and then they say, listen, in 2-3 weeks, we'll dial that in. And then we commit to the date like a couple weeks later, right? And then at some point, there becomes an external milestone, like a launch event or a big customer that's expecting something. And then it's like, okay, we need that forecast to be accurate. If the forecasts keep being inaccurate, it becomes very difficult to run the business. So at that point, it becomes a question of performance, I think. But that's really where I start. And the expectations, again, change based on, we expect new grads to be wildly wrong on their estimates and staff software engineers to be pretty spot on.
How do you avoid then result of all that being always overestimating? Because you cannot be wrong if you overestimate.
Well, what is it? Goodhart's law, where every measure becomes an objective or something. You don't tie that directly to compensation. I think that's hopefully an obvious thing, but it becomes at a certain point, like at least in tech startups, everybody's got equity. And at the end of the day, hopefully everybody's got the maturity to understand that like we want accurate forecasts, but we also want to be moving as quickly as possible because there is a market out there that's going to move on without us if we don't keep up. So ideally, the employees can share in the upside of hitting that deadline, right? You hit the deadline, you close the big customer. That big customer leads to an increased valuation at the next funding round, and that's more money in the employee's pocket, right? And so I think that it's a lot harder to feel that at larger tech companies. But in smaller ones, I think most people do feel that.
I can't believe we've talked close to an hour already, and we haven't even started talking yet. I want to be respectful of your time. We've talked about Dagster in and around. What is Dagster? What kind of people need it? I know it's porta potties and rocket ships, but what if I'm doing something else?
Well, a lot of companies need data.
A lot, isn't it? Is there a company that doesn't need data? Doesn't have data? My description of software engineering is basically it's all data in, data out. That's all we do, one way or another.
And a lot of businesses like that too, right? Like a lot of data is very important to sales processes, very important to marketing and understanding the health of your distributed system. These are all data problems, they're all data pipelines that back that. And so I think any company that's like greater than like 5 or 10 people probably has data pipelines. Dagster is an open source technology to like build and operate data pipelines, and we have a commercial product on top of that.
Why would I want to move from the open source project to the product?
We try to make a really good data orchestration tool. So it's similar to how Kubernetes, you write a bunch of YAML and it makes sure that your service is up and running, and it'll move pods around and it'll run a reconciliation loop to make sure that like the state of the system is what you expect. We do a similar thing, but specialized to the data domain. So we make sure that the data is hitting its SLAs and is flowing through the pipes. The Dagster orchestrator does all that stuff in open source. Our commercial product, there's kind of like 3 reasons why people would buy it. The first is it's hosted and we manage infrastructure, and that is valuable. The second is we provide a lot of the multiplayer and enterprise features that you would expect, like the Okta integration, all that stuff. You can put open source behind like an identity aware proxy if you wanted to, but we provide a lot of the role-based access control and audit trails and all that stuff. And then the third reason is there's a lot of adjacencies that there's extra tool. Like once you've onboarded onto Dagster open source, your next question is, okay, how do I monitor the health of my pipeline overall? Like even if my data is hitting the SLAs, beyond that, how can I optimize my system? And you bring in a separate observability tool, you bring in a separate data quality tool, you bring in a separate data discovery tool. And we bundle a lot of that stuff within our commercial product. So, if you want to choose a best of breed technology for that, great. We integrate with all those. But if you want to maybe defer that purchase for a year or two, we provide a lot of that stuff out of the box with Dagster Plus.
Dagster Plus. Well, Dagster can be found at dagster.io. That's DAGSTER.io. How did that name come about? Because I hear DAG and I'm automatically thinking DAG, right? Whatever DAG means, dicyclic what is it? Diacyclic graph?
Directed acyclic graph.
Directed acyclic. Thank you. Is that part of this?
That is the core data structure underlying it. Is we have a directed acyclic graph of data assets that resemble basically a complex pipeline.
So it's not dragster, it's dagster.
You're correct, but many people type dragster.
I don't want to take a look at dragster.io. I don't even want to know what's there. It may be safe. It may not be. I'll leave that up to everybody else. All of Pete's information will be down in the episode description. Pete, thanks for being on with us.
Thanks, guys.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.